but we're going to talk mostly about how bug bounty programs are now finally evolving. And we're seeing that after 20 years of bug bounties, there's really new models that are emerging. We're going to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely.
And mostly we'll cover what are the common misconceptions, barriers, fears, what are the really things that are stopping organizations from benefiting from the power of crowdsourced security and elastic security teams like bug bounty programs. We'll take a look at a few lessons from Barracuda Network's bug bounty program, and they're a partner of FuckCrowd.
Yep,
right? They're
that's
managing
correct.
their bug bounty through FuckCrowd. And we'll talk a little bit about really how every organization can derive value from a bug bounty program and what are some of the common pitfalls and the solutions to those problems that we can suggest. With finally some tips and advice from Casey, from your experience and the FuckCrowd experience on how to run an effective bug bounty program.
Looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
Sounds good.
So Casey, can you just help us understand who you are and really what got you into starting a bug bounty company?
Absolutely. So my background, I actually started in the IT industry straight out of high school. Very quickly got into penetration attacking. Yeah. So Sydney, Australia, that's where the accent's from. We're all based here in San Francisco now. Once FuckCrowd started moving, we got our initial round of funding. We got over here as quick as we could. But yeah, it all started back over there. Yeah, pretty much just love breaking into stuff, understanding how it works, getting behind the locked door, the whole idea of like thinking like a bad guy without necessarily having the desire to actually do things that, you know, cause harm, if that makes sense.
So would you describe yourself as a hacker for good?
Yeah, in a sense, yeah. I mean, I think I spend more time doing the business stuff than on the tools nowadays, but definitely that's how I got my start.
As the CEO of FuckCrowd.
Correct, yeah.
But you started out as a hacker, as a security researcher.
Correct, yeah.
And what was the first inspiration to start a company that's going to be an intermediary or, you know, a platform to connect security researchers with companies that would like to run a bug bounty?
Yeah, for sure. So prior to FuckCrowd, I actually ran a penetration testing company in Australia. Did a lot of work for different, you know, organizations, financial services, retail, so on, the usual suspects that are consuming that type of work. There was two things. One was I didn't feel like the amount of resource they were able to apply to the task of actually finding out where they're vulnerable.
So there was a mismatch between the problems and the security vulnerabilities and the resources that were being tasked.
Yeah, I mean,
finding those.
If you sum it up, you've got a crowd attacking you. Essentially, you've got lots of different hackers, lots of skill sets, lots of time, lots of different motivations. You know, there's all sorts of different people, and it's a crowd of people that are actually on the offense. And the way the companies are typically defending against that is paying, you know, people by the hour. Or using tools that, you know, are good. They're definitely better than nothing, but they'll never be as smart as an actual individual will who's motivated. So there's a bit of an imbalance, and that was the problem that I was wanting to solve. I think the other piece was we had a bunch of, it was a period of time where I think Facebook were doing a lot of marketing and PR around their bug bounty program. They were going out saying they loved it.
Yeah, the Facebook bug bounty program has really been notorious, maybe you're famous, for paying out up to millions of dollars each year to hundreds of thousands of security researchers.
And they get fantastic results from it too.
A lot of value.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing that was happening is the customers that I was doing, you know, traditional work for wanted to understand what my thoughts were on bug bounty programs. They were leaning in on the idea, so I just started asking them, like, why are you doing this? What's actually stopping you from doing it?
And you discovered what were the main reasons?
They all said basically the same things, and at that point, you know, light bulb came on. Okay, if we can actually address those issues in the format of a company, we might have something that can disrupt the industry.
So we're going to really jump into those later on in this webinar. What are those main issues and reasons that companies and organizations do not consider or are afraid, perhaps, to go ahead with a bug bounty program?
Yeah, for sure. It's primarily issues of resourcing. So how am I going to actually manage this? You know, security people are hard enough to hire as they are. How am I going to get this done? Get all the other things that I'm still needing to do done, and you know, basically have the additional overhead of running a program. Control. I think there is this sense of, you know, hackers are bad people in black belt
controlling the interaction.
Yeah, just the whole, like, I guess the aspect of trusting these people and inviting them in. Like, how can we put some control around that to make them more comfortable?
Foster that trust relationship. So let's get right to it.
Sure.
A little bit about myself as your host today, Karen Elazari. I'm an industry analyst, previously with GigOn Research. I'm also a writer occasionally for the European edition of Wired. Recently wrote a cover piece for Scientific American. I do a lot of thinking, writing, speaking sometimes. Maybe you've seen some of my talks around the world. And I'm known online as Karen E. All the E's are spelled with 3 R, 3, and 3. So if you want to tweet something at me or at KC, now is your chance. And let's just really go into it and try and take a look not just at the past, but also at the future. How bug bounty programs, which is something started about 20 years ago, if I'm not wrong, how they're changing today. And if we're looking at the history of cybersecurity, in the past 25 years, these computing environments and software languages have been on the top 10 of vulnerabilities found. That's according to a recent SourceFire report. They really went ahead and looked at 25 years of vulnerabilities and security bugs that were being reported. But the question is really, what's the future of cybersecurity going to look like? And it's probably going to be about a whole lot more than just these computing environments, right? It's going to be about a few new different types of technologies, smart homes, connected homes, web giants like Google and Facebook, Yahoo, Salesforce. Yep. It's going to be about these recent discoveries of design flaws, really, like Heartbleed, the OpenSSL bug, the Bash, shell-shock vulnerability. In a lot of these cases, we're discovering and learning about security vulnerabilities in fundamental products that everyone relies on, right?
Absolutely.
So my personal perspective, I don't know if you agree, Casey, but I'm pretty sure a few other people think so, that really this is a pretty complicated problem space. Yeah. And it's not just going to be, the top 10 software languages or computing environments. It's going to be a much broader problem space. And that's why, from my perspective, we need a whole lot more people looking at the problem, trying to find the bugs.
Absolutely.
It's a world where we're all connected, obviously. So my inspiration when I was thinking about this was the concept of an immune system, really using security researchers and hackers around the world as a way to find the problems, find the bugs, and trigger a change. And that was the topic of a recent presentation I gave at the annual TED conference a few months back, and you're welcome to check it out online. Let me know if you like the idea. I think FuckCrowd and me, we're really on the same page in the concept of really harnessing that power of the crowd, right?
Absolutely.
Many security researchers.
Absolutely. And I agree completely with what you're saying there around like the rate of vulnerabilities and the criticality. I think the other thing is that the general trend in IT is to make everything as accessible to as many people as possible. That's sort of where everything is going. And in doing that, you end up exposing more of your attack surface to the bad guys. So the criticality of getting this right is actually on the way up as well. So yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about how bug bounty programs start and how they're changing right now. This is a recent report from, I think, the Newswire Association. Actually, it's not a recent one. It's from 1995. It's the first ever bug bounty program announced by Netscape for the Netscape Navigator 20 years ago.
This is really cool. I actually knew that Netscape were the first mention of a tech company actually doing this, but I've never seen the actual report.
What I really like is the headline, that it says the program harnesses the power of the internet.
Yep.
This was in 1995. So what has changed since, right? If we're looking at the history of bug bounties, since 1995, 20 years ago, a lot of other programs set up. Mozilla, which kind of took over the Netscape project, has their own bug bounty program. It's been around for more than 10 years now. Some of the biggest companies on the planet are running a bug bounty program today. And one thing that I'm seeing as a security researcher at Tel Aviv University, and it's part of my PhD study, is that really there's some scientific research papers emerging talking about the value that these programs are generating. A recent study published by a few researchers from, I believe, Berkeley, California, looked at Mozilla and Google's programs, which have been running for quite some time. They gathered a lot of data, and they realized that they are generating a lot of value, and sometimes even finding high severity vulnerabilities and bugs that internal researchers in those companies, these are not small organizations, Mozilla or Google, they do have a lot of security talent on hand, but really using that power of a broader bug bounty program was very beneficial to them. And that's the time to talk about what's the next step. So how our bug bounty program is going to change in the near future. And this is an opportunity to talk about what FuckCrowd is doing, which is different. So really, if there's one thing that we have to learn about this new model is that you guys, or the FuckCrowd platform, is a trusted intermediary, basically, between the security researchers and the company or the organization.
Precisely.
So how is that different from a company like Google or PayPal or Mozilla running their own program?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the main thing, we actually drew, one of the first things when we first arrived out here was to go and talk to all of those companies and get really their view on how these things work, what they seen and experienced as like the things that work really well, and then some of the things that don't, so we could basically build our products partly based on that feedback. I think the big difference between those guys doing it in-house and using FuckCrowd as the intermediary is the fact that not everyone has the resources that those organizations have to actually operate these programs.
Mm-hmm. So it's about resources.
It's primarily about resources, but
and
it's
a more
also
flexible way to use them.
Yeah, so that's the key piece. I think the other part of it is the ability to actually just deploy the crowd in a way that doesn't necessarily look exactly like the Google or the Facebook bug bounty program where it's public. Actually deploying them in chunks of time as a replacement for a penetration test, for example.
So a more managed, more controlled, managed sort of.
Exactly. Doing it on a private basis, different things like that. These are all things that theoretically a company could run in-house, but it's not their core business. It is ours. We're very good at making that efficient and effective for them, and also successful for the crowd.
Specialty.
Yeah, that's our thing.
All right. And these are some of the organizations that you guys work with, right? So quite a few well-known names out there.
Yes.
Big companies, small companies, a bunch of technology companies and security companies. That's really impressive.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, we're pretty proud of the traction we've had in the market, and I think part of that is us actually going out and doing a good job. But then the other side of it, obviously, is that this is a problem that very obviously needs to be solved, and the market are leaning in on, which is cool.
What's interesting is that some of these organizations are security-oriented companies like AVG or Barracuda Networks, right? And even for a security company where their specialty is antivirus or anti-malware or maybe network security, they're finding value in partnering with somebody whose specialization is running a bug bounty program.
Yeah, and then the crowd on the back end as well. I mean, I think the thing with all of this, a really interesting part of this conversation is to kind of take some of the embarrassment away from the idea that vulnerabilities do get into code. Making something work the way it should is hard enough, and there's obviously best efforts being put into making sure they don't introduce vulnerabilities as well. But things happen, right? So setting up a backstop. Exactly.
I think bugs happen is going to be the next kind of bumper sticker, right? So
that's probably not a bad T-shirt.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, bug bounties are not just for high-tech or technology companies, software companies. We're seeing bug bounty programs in automotive, air travel, consumer electronics, financial services. Western Union is one of your customers.
Yep.
United recently launched their own bug bounty program, although they're paying in air miles. So I know some people have called it a Boeing bounty program. Just to be clear, that's not managed by.
No, they're running that in-house. Yeah.
But it is showing you how new organizations or new types of companies and sectors are seeing the value to bug bounty programs.
And I think the thing to add on to that as well is that traditional ones are as well. And where this all got started and kind of the epicenter of the conversation around bug bounties in the market is very much tech companies, and it's sort of seen as a Bay Area or a Bay Area style company thing to do.
But it's not just in the Bay Area.
But it's not just that. What we're seeing is because of these different ways that we give companies the ability to consume the crowd, like we can do things privately or whatever else, they're starting to, everyone's leaning in on the resourcing and the economic model of crowdsourcing, but not necessarily wanting to do it the tech way, but they are becoming customers of ours and adopting the model, which is pretty cool.
So let's talk about what are the common questions or barriers or fears and misconceptions that some organizations that maybe have heard about the concept of a bug bounty program, but are still kind of not sure how to go ahead. And you mentioned that you've heard a few of these issues in the past, right? Fears of losing control, fears of maybe attracting negative attention, right? And at least from the scientific research and some of the papers on the topic, there have been a few core reasons or core issues that are being raised as the main reasons really for organizations not to go ahead and jump on board with a bug bounty program. So what we really want to do today is discuss these barriers one by one and learn also from you, the audience members, what you think about these barriers, and maybe suggest a few ways to overcome them. Definitely. And convince more people to join the bug bounty revolution.
Most definitely.
So here are some questions that companies and organizations often raise. Not sure how they will manage it, what they have to do as a company. Do they have to build their own team to source and handle the security reports that are being submitted to them? One big question, I think, Casey, and you've probably seen this as well, is who can see the vulnerability data? Are you now going to open up your most secret or most maybe embarrassing sometimes details to a crowd of researchers or maybe even to the company that's managing the program?
Yeah,
what would you say to an organization that has that concern?
Yeah, in terms of actually making it available to the broader public after it's fixed, there's the whole conversation around coordinated vulnerability disclosure and actually using the teaching points that come from when these things are discovered and fixed to educate the broader community. Philosophically, I think that's a great idea, and I think the companies that are comfortable with doing that definitely should. But that's not something that everyone's going to be able to kind of stomach, if that makes sense. I think there's organizations, the further away you get from the tech company end of the business spectrum, so to speak, there's a risk around that.
Let me ask you a tough question there, Casey.
Sure,
I'm sure you get this a lot. As an intermediary, right, as a mediator for the conversation, the platform between the security researchers and the companies, how much information or insight does FuckCrowd get into these, sometimes intimate details of security vulnerabilities?
Most definitely. So what we have within FuckCrowd is actually a triage team, and a big part of what they're doing is basically sorting out the signal from the noise, making sure that the report's at a level of quality that when the customer receives it, and even then when it goes from the security team down to the engineering team to be fixed, it's relevant to them. It's something that they can understand easily and act upon. So because of that, they're all background checked and all these different things. We have a pretty stringent layer of trust that we make them hurdle to actually join that team. But they are able to see the issues on the platform as they go through if the customer is getting us to do that for them.
Is that something that the company can choose?
Correct.
The level of how much information they're
and to be fair on that one, most do at the end of the day, because obviously there's companies that are thinking about this and weighing it up, but at the, you like actually running one of these things, you've got to be pragmatic about, okay, how much of that is actually an issue if what I'm getting in return is the benefit of being able to focus on the core task of actually resolving these issues.
So let's talk about that, what companies are getting in return, because really it's all about this fine art, right? Finding the balance between using the crowd or using crowdsourcing security even in the right way, getting the right amount of value out of it. And there are a few different types of benefits here, at least that's something that we've seen in our recent discussions and in my own research work, that the benefits are not just a security benefit. It's not just about finding the problem. There are other values to be had here.
Most definitely.
Number one might be reputational value for a company that decides to go ahead with a bug bounty program. From what I've seen, a company that has a program is conceived or perceived as more mature or more progressive when it comes to their security operations.
Definitely. If it's a public program, there is definitely that value add. I think it's still at a point where it's novel enough an idea in the market that you're seen as being quite cutting edge if you're doing this type of thing, and if that's something that's of value to your organization in terms of your reputation or even selling your product, attribute a greater level of trust to what you're delivering to your customers because you're so proactive when it comes to security. It's a good thing.
And sometimes simply it's just because more pairs of eyes have looked at the code.
There's that as well. I think the market, the market that actually sees like customers or companies going out and doing a press release around this thing, they understand that intuitively. So they see the fact that, okay, cool, these guys are basically this customer or this client, person running a program, is harnessing this white hat community. They're obviously going to get more information about where they're vulnerable than previously because there's more effort being applied to the task.
Yeah, and we'll get back to the different types of value that companies can derive. But another common question is, who are these researchers anyway? Who are these hackers from around the world that we're going to be interacting with? And while surprisingly, some people think that the level of talent or capability or skill sets on the part of those researchers is not on par with what they might have inside their organization. The other part of that is that a lot of companies are actually using a bug bounty program as a way to attract a talent pool, and maybe even vet the talent.
Yeah, definitely. To speak to the quality of the researchers, the other side of that is that we've got, it's quite common for us to see people in the crowd that are actually in-house employees of other organizations or security firms or whatever else, that are incredibly capable, and what they're using bug bounties for on their side of the fence is actually, it's a bit of a context switch. Here's their day job, and then they can go home, or they can do whatever and hack on something new.
So it's another way to harness that flexibility.
Exactly right, exactly right. But yeah, in terms of, so the back end of that question, can you repeat that? I missed
yeah, sure.
I lost train of thought.
Sorry to cut your train of thought.
That's quite all right.
But really what I'm seeing, and I think you're seeing this as well, is that a bug bounty program is a way to vet talent, it's a way to attract the talent pool. We mentioned earlier Facebook. They have an annual competition called the Hacker Cup. Now, that's not necessarily a bug bounty program, but it has been shown to be a great way to attract really fantastic engineering talent from all over the world.
Definitely.
So I want to go ahead and let our audience ask us a few questions, or rather vote on this interactive poll that we have coming up for you guys. What I did here is that we listed a few major reasons or concerns that we've seen in research and in conversations as emerging as maybe the most major barriers. And the first one, and these are listed not in order of priority, it's just for you to consider. The first one is that organizations don't consider themselves mature enough or progressive enough to support the program internally, and not sure how it's going to interact with their security operations and development operations. Second reason is they're concerned or not sure how to engage with the hacker community and keep themselves safe from maybe negative intention or problematic outcomes. The question of control, which really came out earlier as well, is emerging definitely as a major reason. It's control over the security operations, the development process. What I'm seeing from my interviews with security officers, many times the biggest question of all is time, and agreeing on the time frame between the discovery and the reporting of a bug and when that gets fixed. And that is one major concern for a lot of companies. But I also think that's one thing that an intermediary or a trusted platform can help negotiate those kind of testy waters. The fourth reason that we have lined up is sometimes bug bounty programs can be seen as something with a high operational cost, an unclear, bottom line. What's the dollar price that we're going to pay here? Are we going to end up paying $2 million to, 2,000 security researchers? What is the value that we're going to get? And these are some of the questions that we're seeing. And I'd be happy to see after the audience has voted and if we can show those results. Okay, we'll give you guys a few more seconds to consider these and think about what you might consider as the top reason, the top barrier. And I can tell you, at least from my point of view, that all of these reasons are usually listed high on that list. And what do you think, Casey?
Yeah, no, I mean, these are all, going back to the story I was telling at the start about how this all kind of got started. These are pretty much mapping directly to the when I asked the why aren't you doing it question, this is pretty much the things that everyone I spoke to said at that point in time. So yeah, it's...
So if you had to pick the one major reason, number one reason, what would you say? Maturity of the organization, fear of a hacker planet, concerns over the security and development operations process, or the potentially high operational costs?
I'd say it depends on whether you're talking about tech companies or basically non-tech companies, so everyone else.
So it differs between technology companies.
It really does. Within technology companies, I think it mostly goes to the organizational maturity of the organization. Like, are we prepared to handle this process? Do we have basically our SDLC and the processes that we have for taking vulnerabilities and baking them into the release cycles to get them fixed? Is that ready for this kind of level of input and different things like that, which is a very valid thing to be thinking through. I don't necessarily think it's a flat no as an answer for that, but if that's getting improved along the way, then that's a good thing too. Right? I think outside of tech, it's mostly a concern around. I mean, we refer to it internally sometimes as crowd fear, like this sense of like, this sense of we don't really understand who these people are. Most of what we hear in the media is that we should be afraid of them. And now we're talking about a process where we're actually engaging people that look like those folks that we've been told to fear. If you think it through logically, like you can control the vulnerability if you know it's there. You can't control malicious actors that are out on the internet, so it's sort of a moot point to start with.
I agree. I mean, that kind of negative attention is already happening. So really the concept that you don't want to attract that kind of negative attention, it might not be the most
and the reality of it is
up-to-the-minute thing.
You've already got the negative attention. If you're on the internet, that's already happening, right? And what this does is gives you the opportunity to attract positive attention. That takes some explaining sometimes. I think tech companies are further along and already thinking about that. Folks that are outside that, generally need a little bit more education around that idea.
Yeah. Well, this webinar is all about really trying to focus on those problems and educating some of the concerned individuals or the organizations.
Definitely.
And we do have your poll results. We'll share them later on after we finish this webinar, and they'll be also on the video of the webinar, which is recorded and will be available later on through the FuckCrowd website. So let's move on. Some of my research findings about these barriers is that really a flexible security capacity, or like what you guys call the elastic security team, using a larger community is something that actually even a lean startup can enjoy the benefits of. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something only for the big mature companies, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's even
it's an interesting one at the moment. We originally were thinking when we started FuckCrowd of this as a solution for the small business security problem, so to speak. And I think part of the reason was at that point we hadn't validated the fact that enterprise would be interested. We quickly realized that they were, and for business reasons we decided to focus on that.
All types of companies, all sizes.
Pretty much,
companies of all shapes and sizes.
But you're right in that, if you've got the right kind of reward structure and you can run things the right way, provide the right type of incentive, pretty much anyone on the spectrum of size of a company can basically benefit from this idea.
Right. And if we're going back to that control issue, or the fear of losing control over the security ops and the security development process, once again, at least from my personal perspective, looking at some of the emerging research in this field in academia, it looks like a trusted intermediary, a platform or marketplace is sometimes the right way to alleviate some of those fears, right?
And one of the reasons for that, like we've got a team of people that are, like it's a crowd operations team within the company that are specifically focused on, how do we keep these people happy? How do we keep them engaged, incentivized? If there's ever anything that needs fixing, we fix it quickly and so on. And that's good from a community management point of view. I think the other reason that an intermediary is an interesting way to actually resolve this problem is that it's almost like an abstracted reputation from the customer. That makes sense. So we're sitting in the middle here, focusing on figuring out what the community needs to keep it happy, healthy, engaged, growing, all these different things.
Herding cats, I like to call it. Right?
That's in a sense.
Because sometimes, really, working with security researchers, it could be, a complex, nuanced kind of.
It's an inherently interesting community to manage because you're talking about a group of people that are wired up to break things, right? So that's my people too. So this is fine. I didn't mean that as an offense. I think it's actually the value of them. But there's nuance to it because of that, right? They're looking at how we're interacting with them. They're looking at the integrity of the customers that we're dealing with, whether they follow through on their commitments, so on and so forth, and making sure that process is smooth, expectations are aligned and met is really critical.
That really is the role for the trusted intermediary. That's really what you guys can also do.
Staying on top of that and making sure that happens on both sides of the fence. Because ultimately what we're doing here is we've got two groups of people, the companies and then the researchers that really need each other. Fundamentally aren't that great at getting along historically. Like you look at the different things that have happened with
researchers and organizations. There's a lot of fear and mistrust, maybe misconceptions on both ends.
And on both sides, exactly. So part of it is how do we broker that connection and make sure that it's successful for both sides?
And talking about that, the value that's derived from that connection is not just in the security finding. So what a lot of the academic research is showing is that there was reputational benefits. We talked about those. There's changes to the business process, and I want to go back to that in a second.
Sure.
And there's a hiring potential there, attracting talent, getting talent. But I want to go back to the business process impact. So we discussed this earlier, right, Casey? Sometimes there's just no way to compare with that effect of having that outsider finding a bug.
Definitely.
It's like a boom, you are owned. What do you do now?
Yeah, definitely. I think, fundamentally the reason that vulnerabilities get into software, apart from the fact that it's just hard to write software, and that's a challenge in and of itself, right? To make things work and do what they should. If there's ever mistakes made because security is not a priority for the engineering team, for the developer that's actually punching the keyboard and producing the code, it's generally because they don't actually believe in the reality of the threat that's out there. It's like, okay, this security thing, this idea of potentially getting hacked, like our security team, runs around and tries to get us to believe in the fact that that's a real thing, but we're not really sure that the boogeyman's real in that sense. What we've found, and this is one of the things that we kind of didn't preempt, but we started seeing it so consistently that we've doubled down on extracting this value for customers, is the idea of having your code rather hacked by some kid 8,000 miles away in
You'd rather have
Russia.
your code hacked by a kid than your kid hacked by code.
That's probably true. Yeah, we'll see how that progresses over time.
Pardon the pun.
Flipping that around there.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of, okay, well, this is someone that we don't know. They're on the internet. They don't know anything that the rest of the internet doesn't know, if that makes sense. So they're not, our security team who's inside the four walls of the organization.
So they're using the same kind of perspective and sometimes the same skill sets and sometimes even similar tools to what an actual attacker
they've got the same
using.
Exactly. Right? They've got the same viewpoint as a bad actor. So the thing that happens with the engineering team in particular, once it lands on their desk, is like, oh my gosh, okay, this guy's friendly, he's helped us out, so that's great, but I wonder what his next door neighbor can do. So what you end up doing is creating, the same impact as an actual breach. Like the most security conscious a company's ever going to be is just after it's been hacked, right?
Yes.
Part of what's happening here, and we're seeing as an impact, is that same sort of visceral reaction and that kind of, okay, this is a real thing, let's lean in on it, without the mess and fuss of getting
without that catastrophic moment of being the front line,
exactly right.
The headline.
You get to avoid that part, which is good for people.
Well, if you can derive the security insight before something like that happens.
Exactly.
And I think that there's again great promise there to the work that you guys are doing. So let's talk a little bit more about these different types of value that can be derived from programs and ways for organizations to derive that value, finding it. It's really not just looking at what are the types of security bugs that you're finding and what would be the cost to having that bug found internally. There's a whole variety of different values and benefits to be had there.
Most
right?
definitely.
The security, the technology, maybe you might even create something new or build a new feature or evolve your product because of this, outsider's perspective. There are organizational values like changing the way the business process works. So sometimes, maybe speeding up that development cycle or rather bringing in a security insight earlier in the process.
Yeah, and also potentially getting a greater priority placed on security from a management level as well. We've seen that, what I was just describing before with the reaction on the engineering team, it applies upstream as well.
Upstream.
Actually seeing the fact that, wow, okay, here's the priority level that we've had security set out over the past period of time. We're going to adjust that.
We're going to change that.
Because we've now seen what it looks like when it happens for real.
I think we called it ouch, an outsider just pwned your code.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes there's no replacement. You can't really buy that sort of change in the organization.
No,
and you would rather have it fostered from within the bug bounty program.
Absolutely.
Rather than that, nasty headline or Twitter drama. Or
you want to make believers ahead of time.
Okay. And we've talked a little bit about the cost effectiveness or the potential financial benefits. So can we jump into that a little bit,
Sure.
Casey? And if you can maybe give us some ideas on what does it mean that you can build or reach out to potentially thousands of security researchers. What would be the cost or the cost effectiveness benefit?
The cost benefit of that. I think the thing to consider there. So, there's this whole bug bounty thing that's taken off and is a very noisy conversation that we're obviously a part of right now. The other piece of it that's going on that you hear a lot is this whole area of the cybersecurity talent shortage.
Cisco released a report about the workforce saying that we need 1 million more security professionals in the next few years.
Correct.
So where are they going to come from?
Exactly. Well, two things. Where are they going to come from? Like, we need more people to start with, but then also, is there a way to connect them to the problems that we're trying to solve more efficiently than what we're doing right now? And where this whole idea of it being kind of elastic and having, on the supply side, as I mentioned before, there's people, dropping in, doing some work, dropping out, getting back to their day job, whatever else. That spread across a group of people provides like a really, solid pipeline of effort going into that problem set, right? And then from the demand side, they're looking at it saying, okay, we've got this need right now. We may not have it in a little bit, so let's go out, create an offer, incentivize the behaviors that we want, reward them when we get them. And then we can kind of pick and choose how we do that instead of going through the whole process of trying to hire someone from a shortened talent pool.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So, and we talked a little bit about this as well, the talent or the hiring benefit of working with a bug bounty program. We talked about potentially companies enjoying a stronger brand name in terms of their security reputation in the marketplace. And this is a good time to talk a little about what you guys learned from your work with Barracuda Network.
Sure.
Right? And from what I understand, they had their own bug bounty program in place about 5 years ago, right? So what made them change from having their own bug bounty program to working with you guys?
Yeah, it was, they had their own program. They were one of the early adopters in this whole concept of bug bounties. They were running it for a period of time, getting great results from it, all these different things. We started talking to them. I think we met at a DEF CON or a Black Hat. It was, one of those connection points where we just started chatting about what either of us, like what we both were doing, because we wanted to learn about their experience as much as they wanted to learn about what we were doing. Really, the upshot of it was they, two things. One, they wanted to get basically better attention focused into the program, which obviously we're able to do because we've got this crowd that we're actively managing and keeping across what's going on, keeping them active and so on. And that yielded results straight after we switched it on. They had some new things come through which are public and all of that, so that worked, which is great. The other bit was, okay, how do we scale this thing without necessarily increasing rather our overhead as a team.
So without having to have 10 people or 5 people
to actually manage the process
full time at Barracuda Networks, having to respond and manage.
Exactly right.
And as they are growing, they were probably expecting.
Yeah, and then wanting to actually scale the program out. So okay, cool. We're having a difficult time, as everyone is, finding talent for the roles that we've got right now. If we're going to scale this thing out, how are we going to actually resource that? So that was the other piece that they wanted to solve. So yeah, it was good. Okay,
and we learned that they recognize the value of having more people and building that program.
Yeah, they'd already experienced that from the programs that the program that they'd run themselves in the past. As I mentioned, they wanted to actually start to increase the activity level, increase the scale, that get more eyes on target, re-engage the community or increase the engagement of the community, and then over time, scale that out even more, so they can maintain this cadence of testing across their different platforms and bits of software they've got out there.
And be able to grow their business without stopping or holding back on the security operations as well. So we listed some of the problems that FuckCrowd has learned Barracuda has handled.
Yeah, I haven't mentioned this, but the whole the logistics of actually paying the researchers. So they're one of the I should have brought that up right at the start, because it's one of the more boring pieces of what we do, but it is a consistent thing.
So the financial process of paying out the rewards.
Yeah, it's actually pretty painful, and it's painful for us as much as it's painful for anyone that are doing it themselves. But part of what we've done is gotten as good and efficient as we can at doing it. And it all happens in one place. So from their perspective, they're cutting a check to us, and then we're doing the distribution of payments to the researchers and taking on that overhead and that task.
That's interesting, because it might be probably the most fundamental part of what you do as a business model for you guys. but it's not clear, it's not obvious that this is something which is of benefit to organizations. So really streamlining their operations.
Yeah.
Right? This is kind of like software as a service. So it's security testing as a service.
Exactly right. Crowd as a service.
Crowd as a service.
The challenge around payments, so the other piece is managing the paperwork around that. So you've got tax documentation, so on, which that all happens through our platform, which is
so
cool.
you take care of the tax.
Yeah, we look after all that.
Maybe you can help me do my taxes.
No, I'd love to, but we're a little busy right now.
Israel, so.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, we'd probably have to learn a few things before we could help you with that. But yeah, this whole idea of the challenge around payments is kind of the 20% of the world that's actually pretty difficult to get money into for various reasons. So for the 80%, it's just PayPal, boom. But then there's areas, there's different sort of situations and circumstances where that last mile requires more like tailored effort to get it done, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I absolutely do.
And that's the part that gets really annoying for a company to run in-house, as well as the whole purchase order process. There's all these different things.
Let's go back though to the technology aspect of security research work. So one of the problems that Barracuda kind of experienced that they had to solve was that they were building their own kind of database to track all of these security findings. And
absolutely.
Actually, companies don't have to do that anymore. Or they can if they want to, but
that's the thing of it. Like, this is the whole idea of like core versus context, right? Like for Barracuda, finding out where they're vulnerable and fixing it is a core part of the security team's mission and the overall company's incentive as well, right? But then all of the periphery around actually managing that process, be it the stuff that we're just talking about with payments or actually building a platform to handle that in-house, that's not what they do. And like companies are competent in doing that. Barracuda work, Google built a brilliant in-house platform that they use, and so on. Like there's examples of that all over the place. But
the company needs to specialize in what they're doing, right?
Exactly.
If they're doing trucks or airplanes or financial services, and instead of becoming an expert on managing security information,
just outsource it to an expert.
Yeah. So that's where FuckCrowd, a platform like that can come into place.
Exactly.
Okay, I wanna take this opportunity to tell the audience that FuckCrowd is going to have a webinar, a follow-up webinar with Barracuda Networks to really dive into these issues.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's going to be
so you'll hear it from you'll hear it in their words, which will be good.
Great, and that's taking place next month.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So the details of that will be on the webinar after we're finished. You'll see it there.
Fantastic, and I do recommend you guys check it out. I think we're just starting out the discussion. There's really so much more that we could talk about when it comes to bug bounty program.
Absolutely.
I want to take us through to maybe the last part of our discussion today and take the time to learn a little bit from your experience, Casey. What makes for a good bug bounty program? What makes one work? The hows, the whys, some ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing in terms of dealing, connecting, as I said before, connecting these two groups of people together is making sure that the way that that's being done actually fits the requirement of the customer.
Okay.
So I think the
so matching.
Yeah, matching it. So okay, should they run this as a private program? Should they run it as a private program that becomes public because that's part of their objective? Should this be run as like what we call a flex program, which is basically a time box.
A flex program?
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more? What's that?
Flex is essentially, so within this group of 17,000 that we've got on the platform, we've got a reputation system that basically allows us to rank people based on their proficiency, their level of activity, the different skill sets, what they're good at, is it IoT or web or mobile or whatever else.
So you have researchers specializing in IoT, mobile, web.
I mean, everyone's got their thing, right? They're like generally what you'll find.
And you can match the right kind of skill sets and proficiencies with the right kind of technology or business focus that the company wants to look at.
Yeah, exactly. And the other part of that is there's a trust component that we measure in there as well. So, okay, if there's an organization that has some of the crowd fear issues that we were talking about before, cool, all right, we can basically grab the people that we know, that we've vetted, that we trust, that have actually proven historically that they're going to be well behaved and provide a good outcome for the customer and have that be a comfortable process for everyone, and just deploy them. So that's the bug crowd piece of it, I think. And in terms of how companies are thinking about this, the important thing to call out there is there's more than one way to do this.
There's definitely more than one way, but what we discussed at the top of the hour was really that bug bounty programs are evolving, right?
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
entering that next stage, that next step in the evolution of these programs. And what is really emerging as one of the most promising ways to go on this next stage is really with the help or with the assistance of a trusted intermediary, a marketplace, a platform. And there's a few ways to do this, but we're seeing a lot of promise there, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think going back to your question around tips, we call it the golden rule.
The golden rule? What's that?
Within FuckCrowd, if you touch the code, you pay for the bug.
If you touch the code, you pay for the bug.
Correct.
So what does that mean?
Well, I mean, the critical piece to making sure that this works, and it's a good process for both sides, and this applies for our programs, it applies to programs generally that are just running, wherever else they may be on the web, is to really make effort to align the expectations between the two sides before it all starts, right? So you want to have a researcher, when they sit down to start hacking on a thing, know exactly what they can expect, know what's okay for them to do.
So managing the expectations.
Yeah.
But what do you mean if you touch the code? Does that mean that if the company is going to change their code base after a security report?
Where I was going with that is, okay, so you've got this alignment of expectations. The second part of that is actually meeting them. So when you say, okay, here's what we're going to do, here's our commitment to you, here's how this works, then if something happens that satisfies that criteria, you do what you said you're going to do.
You follow through.
Exactly.
So it's so much
and
about
the simple version of that is, okay, you're basically incentivizing people to find vulnerabilities, off the back of which you're going to act and make changes to make sure those vulnerabilities go away. If that happens, you pay that researcher.
Yeah. Well, I think it definitely makes sense that if you touch the code, you pay the.
That's the point of value. At that point, they've communicated value into your business. So that's kind of the nature of the process.
The nature of the process.
Yeah.
So towards the end of the hour today, a few ideas maybe on how to find more quality bugs, high severity bugs.
Yeah.
Any ideas on how to help companies and organizations really get more security bang, as it were, for their testing?
Excuse me. Yeah, definitely. There is. I mean, this is a marketplace, right? And what you see is that a higher level of reward incentivizes more attention. It incentivizes more effort from the people that you get the attention of. But what we find in general is that you'll actually activate people at a high level of quality.
What do you mean activate?
As in, okay, someone sees a program, they're very skilled, they see a program, they look at the reward schema for that program, and they're like, no, it's not enough.
Well, is it just as simple as higher rewards?
No, well, I mean, yes, it is.
I've seen one paper that claims that, by the way, released in the past year. But there's a few other approaches as well.
Definitely, and that's not to say that's the only way to do it. I think that is the simplest way to do it. It's pretty much, there's a coin-operated kind of aspect to how to operate a marketplace, right? And that's the most powerful lever that I think is there in play, and the easiest one to change.
Well, there are other types of motivations too, right?
Yeah, there's reputational impact for the researcher. Exactly, there's people building their resume. We see a lot of folk come into the platform, and we love it when this happens, that aren't actually in the security industry to start with.
They're just starting out?
They're a sysadmin, or they're a developer, or whatever else it might be. And when they start working with us, it's very obvious that they've got the golden eye. They know how to think, in a exploitative way.
Yeah.
They know how to think like a hacker. But they've never really transitioned into the industry before. So
they're using the bug bounty program as an on-ramp?
Yeah, exactly right. And then oftentimes what we end up seeing is if they climb the way right up to kind of the top of the platform, and they're able to be seen by the market as someone who's really skilled, and they're getting a job. That's very common now.
This is a good point to mention, that security researchers around the world that are participating in programs are really all kinds of people, all around the world, all shapes and sizes, right? So it is maybe even a way to attract not just greater talent, but more diverse talent.
And that goes back to the million-person problem we were talking about before. Where are these people going to come from? It's not just getting better efficiency out of the community, like the talent pool that we've already got. It's about actually going out and finding the diamonds in the rough that are sitting out there.
The diamonds in the rough, right?
Yeah.
Whose brilliance.
That's how we think about them. It's really cool to watch.
I like thinking about hackers as diamonds in the rough, whose brilliance is sometimes even more shiny because of the rough edges. A little bit of poetry for you guys this morning. Hope that's not too much. All right, so while we were talking about security researchers, those diamonds in the rough, right? Mm-hmm. They are asking themselves, and that's what we're seeing again in some of the conversations we're having. Is it worth it for me? Am I going to be risking myself? Am I going to be risking my future legally? Am I be breaking the law in my own country, or some kind of global law, or there's no global law, but breaking the law in a more universal sense?
Yep.
A lot of researchers are thinking, can I get a job? Mm-hmm. Can I build my resume? Can I get a job? And what defines a researcher anyway? And this has been a question I've heard from a lot of people saying, well, how do you define a security researcher? I don't think there's I don't think you can be a card-carrying member of the Security Research Association, right? It's more of a community. It's more about your approach, your skill sets. So I don't know that there's only one kind of security researcher. Yep. What do you think, Casey?
Yeah, I mean, researcher is an interesting term. Like we actually use it in place. It's interchangeable with the word hacker. But the reason we don't use that word is some of the stuff that we were talking about before, where we know what it means and we understand what it means, but this whole idea, like a big part of what we're doing is getting people that are not necessarily thinking about this right now to accept it, and that actually say, yeah, we're going to invite hackers to come and hack on your stuff. Like that throws up a potential barrier in their thinking.
I'm trying to address that. Individually, I usually use the terms hacker and security research really interchangeably, because I think there's a lot of research work that goes into finding vulnerability.
And that's fundamentally what it is. It's people that have
trial and error.
Yeah, they've got this inclination in how they think to basically get something to do. Like it's got a limitation built into it. They're trying to overcome that limitation to get a different outcome, and that's what is intellectually challenging and interesting to them. So that's the fundamental criteria. I think that can be applied to different things, and we get into the conversation about what does hacker actually mean, which is a completely different conversation.
Yeah, that would be a different conversation. But I do want to point out that FuckCrowd has recently hired Kimberly Price, and she's managing a lot of these interactions with the security community. And I think that's really part of the value that a trusted intermediary can offer, is really herding the cats and managing their
and actually understanding them as well. Like Kimberly comes from, so she was a key piece of the Microsoft Blue Hat program when it was first getting established. She was at the BlackBerry PCERT as well. And in both of those roles, a lot of what she was doing was interacting with the community, actually understanding what they need.
Yeah.
And then working out based on that feedback how to get value that applies to both sides, if that makes sense.
I think if there's one thing that's clear so far and definitely emerging from this conversation is that it's a lot about building that bridge, building those relationships, building the trusted relationship, a place that the company and the hacker can connect and meet, and
finding a way to speak the same language.
Yeah, mediating those maybe two different worlds, sometimes colliding worlds, bringing them together. So before we finish up today, I want to invite you guys in the audience. We have a follow-up question to you guys, and we want to hear what you think is the biggest value, what you would value the most from a bug bounty or a vulnerability discovery program. And we invite you to tweet it out or discuss with us, and we'll also...
I think we've got some questions coming.
Yeah, and we have some audience questions that we're going to bring up in a minute.
Sure.
But we want to continue the conversation. And I think FuckCrowd, we're going to do a few more webinars.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. Look, I think the big thing is to make sure that this conversation is going on and growing, because ultimately it's about actually understanding the fact that this is even possible in the first place, and diving into what are the mechanics of it.
Absolutely. Yep. So let's jump to an audience question that we have. And a member of the audience wanted to know what type of vulnerabilities are most common. So what are the most common types of vulnerabilities that researchers are finding on your platform?
Definitely. The most common by volume tend to be the kind of technical vulnerabilities that are found in web applications. So,
like cross-site
scripting, like by volume. That's
like input parameters and...
Yeah, that type of thing, and that mostly goes to the fact that they're really easy to put into web applications, and they're also pretty easy to test for. So there's more people looking for that.
Is that something that automated scanners can find?
Sometimes. but a lot of the time they can't. So what we find with the researchers that approach testing from more of a QA angle is that they're very good at identifying symptoms and thinking in a scanner-like way, if that makes sense.
Thinking like a scanner.
But where they apply their creativity is where to actually go and look. So they'll look into different nooks and crevices of an application that may have been missed.
That's really the benefit, right, of using human beings to test out their product, and not just automated vulnerability scanners that don't necessarily find all of the problems out there, right?
I think the other side of that, and where we refer to it as the Zen moment.
The Zen moment.
Yeah, for the customer is when we have these like internet melting issues where there's engineers getting woken up and different things like that. And where those tend to happen, it's usually chained issues. So there'll be one issue here, which is not a huge impact in and of itself, but what it does is it allows the exploitation of this other issue over here to create an enormous impact down here, which is another thing that people are far better at finding than
humans are better than machines.
Than machines are at doing that. But I would say that they're less frequent, just because there's a lot of excess out there, and different things like that. But they're the ones that
when they come through. What are the most rare kind of vulnerabilities?
We had, I think, probably the rarest and most impressive one we've had come through was actually it was a type confusion error in BlackPhone.
Oh, in the BlackPhone.
Correct. It's actually there's a write-up on the internet.
Okay.
We can chuck that up there as well for people to take a look at it.
So vulnerabilities and the so-called private secure BlackPhone.
It was a very impressive vulnerability.
And was that found on your program?
Correct.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. Well, you heard it here first, I guess, guys.
It's out there.
It's out there, yeah. So we're going to wrap up this hour. I want to thank you all so much. Thank you so much, Casey.
Thank you.
If you guys want to talk to me on Twitter or to Casey or tweet some questions out to FuckCrowd, feel free to do so. I know you guys are going to have more webinars like this.
Most definitely, yes.
One coming up with Barracuda Networks pretty soon. And I just want to encourage you all, guys and girls, go out there and find more bugs. It could be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.